Well, I wanted to welcome everybody to my presentation, which is How to Write for the Web. And I'm Elena Sharnoff, and I'm the principal for Beat Strategic Communications. And I do a lot of strategy around web and communications, project management. I thought I'd talk about this because I feel like one of the things that's really important is when you're thinking about building a website, the content for your website's really important, and yet I think it's hard to get it right. So one of the things I wanted to ask people, and as I mentioned earlier, but maybe not everybody was in the room, it would be great if you could unmute. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm really curious who in the room has written for the web or is a writer to the web. So I'd love to hear who's done a lot of web writing. Oh, hi, Deb. Can you tell a little bit about your experience?
Is the volume okay?
Yeah.
Well, I have a website, benconti.org, where I just put some of my projects and things I've been doing. It's not very interactive, but it just shows some of the projects I've been working on.
Okay. And Kim, I see you've raised your hand.
Yeah, the group I work for, I do a lot of the web updates as needed. Sometimes I get content, but I'm one of the people tasked once it was developed to kind of keep it up to date.
Okay. And so others in the room don't do a lot of writing for the web. You're more in the development end of things.
I have written for the web. I manage a nonprofit website for music, for marching arts, music education, and I post a lot of the news on the site, but it's pretty basic.
Right.
Get the
Right.
information out type of stuff.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that I wanted to start off with is to say, you know, when we're writing for the web, it's a different format from a lot of printed materials, and so it ends up being a little bit different. So when you think about a lot of the content that you read, a lot of it, the form points to its function. So you have a book. Well, you know how you open a book. A book shows you where to open. Now, some people will read the end first, but most people will start from the beginning. Or you have a brochure, and the brochure is going to kind of, hopefully through the design and other structures, it's going to teach you where to go. Other kinds of written materials, printed materials are going to guide you by the size of the headlines or by the format of the paragraph. So what is different about the web is that there are all those printed formats that we are accustomed to, but there's so many other factors. We have multiple entry points throughout the site, right? We have multiple audiences with very different needs. We have, the website shows up on different devices and different screen sizes. And there are different kinds of screen orientations. And then there's always what I think is really, really important, that whatever you're doing, you're trying to maximize it for your search and your browse. So writing takes on kind of a multi-dimensionality that on a print, in a typical print format, isn't available. And then there are other components that mediate the user experience, right? So there's the content, there are calls to action, the images themselves can draw people in or make them unhappy. There's alt text that can also draw people into a site. You've got the, excuse me, both the SEO that's on the front end and the metadata that's on the back end. You've got page titles, how you name something, how you've structured navigation, and how your page is structured. So all those things are part of what happens when you think about writing for the web. In my view, I think the complexity makes it so much fun, right? I really love that. And I wanted to just make a few other observations about things that I think really need to be taken into account when you're writing for the web. That the phone really is, you've got to start there first, even though that seems a little counterintuitive, because that helps you to think hierarchically when you're writing, because that's how it's going to, you know, what's going to show up on the phone is going to be very different than what shows up on your screen. You want to build for search and optimize for browse. And your homepage is key, but not everybody's going to get to your site through the homepage, right? So you have to sprinkle your message throughout. You do that in a range of different ways. And you also want to make sure that your user knows where they are on the site. And, you know, I would say breadcrumbs, but I know that's not how people do it now. But it's important still to allow people to orient themselves wherever they are. So where do we begin in terms of thinking about writing for the web? Well, I think there are a couple of writing principles. It's important to know your audience, to identify your user's top tasks and asks, to understand your user behavior, to write content that's easy to skim and scan, to organize your content, to make it visual, to engage your user with calls to action, and to help people in search engines find your content, right? So I'm just going to review a little bit about audience. It's important to know who your audience, or really your audiences, are. When you're building the website, you've created some personas, and those personas can really help you to guide you in terms of the tone, the level, the content. And you really do want to be thinking about the needs and tasks of what your user is looking for, and not so much about what your organization is all about. You want to kind of meld those two things. And it's important to really identify the top tasks and asks, right? Because your users often come to your website with a specific task in mind. And if your website doesn't help them, then they're not really going to want to stay. And there are ways to make sure that you are keeping your users happy by doing market research, task analysis, and metrics. All those things can really help to make sure that you're achieving a really good connection with your user. And another thing that's important to think about on a website is users are not going to read everything. They're skimming their content and they're scanning their content. And again, the image of the phone is really helpful, because that's, people flick through their phone to find pieces of information. And so when you think about it that way, in that very narrow viewpoint, then it helps you to really format what you're thinking about in terms of the way that you structure your content. So you want to create content that's easy to skim and scan. And part of doing that is to use some of these basic writing principles. So you write it in plain English, you keep it short, you break it up, you write in active voice, you connect through pronouns, so you connect to your readers, your audience, and you use the inverted pyramid. So when you think about plain English, you have active verbs, you use everyday words, you don't use jargon, you don't use marketese, and you don't use a lot of wordy phrases. You want to keep it short. This is a really important thing, like pare it down, right? Keep your sentences short, and that really means no more than 20 words a sentence, right? And then you want to break it up, right? So you have short paragraphs, 3 to 5 sentences in a paragraph, one important idea, right? You want to write in the active voice. You think about subject, verb, object model, and that really enables you to write short, directed, clear, focused writing. And then what's helpful is when you think about connecting through your pronouns, so that once you've referred to your user as a you, they feel like they're already engaged. And then your organization is we, then you've made a connection already through your language with your users. And then you want to use the inverted pyramid, which is that you get that most important thing out in front. So often in a more academic situation, you build to your point. In writing for the web, you start with your point. It's very important. So the other part of that, so we've kind of talked about writing principles, and that's really about how you think about how you're going to say things. But then you want to think about how you structure what you say, right? I think it's really important. And one of the things that's really neat about writing for the web is that it's helpful to understand how websites are built, because there are all kinds of hierarchies in the ways that a website is built, and some of those principles really help you in the writing process. So for example, you want to really organize your content. You want to develop a logical structure for your page's content, and that involves leveraging your headings and your subheadings. It involves using bulleted and numbered lists. highlighting your keywords to draw attention to them, using hyperlinks, but wisely, and really helping, using all of these things to help remind readers where they are. So you want to leverage your headings and your subheadings, and you want to really front load your headings with strong keywords and verbs, because sometimes that's all people are really going to see. They're going to just read the headlines, maybe the subheadings. They may not even read the rest of the content. So think of that really as, you know, the bread that holds all the sandwich together. You want to omit non-essential words, and you want to understand that questions, like using pronouns, questions can really help engage readers in determining whether or not they want to learn more about the content. So using bulleted and numbered lists really helps you to break out your content and to help people look at it very, very quickly. So you can chunk out your text. You can, you know, a numbered list enables you to indicate priority. A bulleted list gives you an opportunity to indicate a whole bunch of content. And then it's another way to kind of keep your content short. Use a bulleted list. It's so skimmable, and then people will really be able to digest what it is that you're trying to say. But there are also other things that are important, like thinking about how somebody looks at a page with their eyes, right? So I feel like some of what happens when you're thinking about the content, you still want to make it visual. And how it's structured in a visual way can also really help people get your content. So here are some things that you can use to help make it visual even without images. So you create a hierarchy of your headings. You highlight your keywords. That helps to draw the eye, right? You use images, diagrams, or multimedia. You use them in a way to reinforce the text that you're, or the content that you're sharing. You use Whitespace. And you can use hyperlinks to help people understand that there's more information, to point them there, but then to still keep them on the page or within your site. So it's important to create a hierarchy of headings, because first of all, that's important for your reader, but it's also really helpful and to keep things short, to keep things skimmable, but it's also really helpful for Google, right? Google is also an important, or other search engines, obviously, that if you're using your HTML heading syntax as well as your content syntax, that way Google can understand how your page is structured, and that's really important as well. And then you can highlight your keywords. It's a way to help people see the critical aspects of what it is that you're trying to put forward. It's a nice visual device to help them figure things out. And, but you want to be really careful. Don't overdo it. Just make sure that it's just enough. And of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? But make sure that they reinforce what it is that you're trying to do. And then use your white space. If things are too crowded, it can usually make it very difficult to take a look at what it is that you're trying to say. So I think white space is a really important aspect of thinking about how to shape your content. And then use your hyperlinks wisely, right? Your hyperlinks can bring your users to relevant information. Sometimes your hyperlinks can help them go to other important parts of your site. Be really careful and let people know if they're going to leave your site, right? At least flag that if you're going to take them to important information that's not on your site. And then, of course, it's really important to engage your user with calls to action. I've heard it said that you should have a call to action on every page, and I think that that is a little bit overkill. But on the other hand, it's really important to help, calls to action can really help shape the user experience. It can help them linger on the page. It can help them find out more information that they might not have paid attention to. It engages them. It makes them feel like they can take an action on your site. So a call to action is a really useful part of thinking about how to organize your content so that you can think about what is going to be the important thing that you want your users to do, and also how are you going to keep them engaged. And then, of course, you want to be thinking about how your users and search engines find your content, right? So you really want to pay attention to your metadata, because that's going to help people in their search. You want to make sure that you do your keyword research and you sprinkle it throughout, because not everybody's going to come to your homepage. Not everybody's going to start from where you expect. So you want to make sure that you've sprinkled the most important part of your of the overall content of your site throughout your site. And then you want to really make sure that you're using alt text for your images and for so that they're, once again, another really important aspect of both SEO and also enabling people to find your site through these backdoor ways. And then, of course, there are other things that are important, like creating the right tone, look, and feel. So I selected this site not because I think, oh, I love this website design, but I happen to love the blog for Food 52, and their website, it reflects their blog in that it's got a very subdued color palette. Not that you can see it so much here, but they're really clever. Our chips are sealed, right? A virtual happy hour. Recipes we're loving. It's very engaging, and yet it's very pared down. And so their aesthetic is kind of these cool colors, very pared down, but they also really love to engage their audience. And I feel like their website reflects that. So you want to be thinking about having a unified tone, look, and feel throughout your site, so that it feels, when you go from one page to another, from your top level into more, as you go down into deeper layers, that you feel like it's part of a unified whole, and that your color, images, and the tone all help to reinforce the kind of organization that you're reflecting. And then, of course, you really have to proofread, right? It's very important to make sure that whatever you've done, you've spell checked, and you've made sure that you've spell checked on your headlines, and you've spell checked on your on your text, and on your alt text. Any place where there can be an error, it's helpful to make sure that it's good. So let's see. So I have spoken very quickly and have gotten to all of my 40 slides. And so what I'd really like to do is open it up to people. I'd really like to hear what kinds of challenges people have found in terms of writing for the web. Because I think that what's interesting, I was talking to somebody and he said, oh, I made a website. It was really easy. I did it in a weekend, but that's because somebody had already given me all the content. And I think that that's one of the things that when you're building a website, I often feel like content becomes the thing that gets inserted last. And yet it's also really critical to how a website works. So I was wondering what people had to say about that. If anybody wanted to talk a little bit about their own experiences in writing for the web.
Yeah, sure. I'll take a step. Thank you also for this is a good presentation. As someone that's a solutions architect, content strategist, UX designer, all these different hats that I wear, one thing in content on the web that I see a whole lot is when you have multiple people contributing and there's no consistency in how there's talk, or sometimes people are a bit desperate for an outcome. And then you start packing that content full of buzzwords or anything else to try to fish the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah. I think that's true, especially when you have multiple contributors. So I think it's useful to have, you know, guidelines and sometimes even a structure for how, you know, maybe you limit how long your headlines can be, for example. I mean, there are ways to help to shape the experience for people so that when they're contributing, there's that, or maybe you have some kind of style guidelines that can help, or you edit yourself, right? You make sure that there is an overall tone that you're able to maintain by just doing a regular review, but it does complicate things. And then of course, doing your metrics can help indicate when, okay, you're not achieving your goal, right? I think if there are too many calls to action, it's hard for people to know where to go, right? What's the most important thing? So I think that hierarchy, always thinking about the hierarchy of things, or thinking about it on that phone screen really helps me to like pare down my verbosity.
Hi, this is Brian. I work at UMass at CICS with Carrie Shaw and others. And I'm curious, we're trying to do the career side of the website. And so I would love for students to be able to contribute content to the website, but I haven't found an effective way for them to do that, or even to just simply give feedback. Like we've played around with having a little, was this helpful indicator at the bottom of the pages, but it's not overly active. So it's hard to get that feedback and or contributions from students.
You mean for them to contribute in what way?
Maybe like a recommended resource. So if they just went into an interview situation and they learned something or in preparation for that, for us to be able to crowdsource that kind of content because other students might find it useful too.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think the thing with crowdsourcing is that it's really helpful to have it, to tie it to something, right? So when I worked at UMass, I was in the College of Natural Sciences, and one of the things that we did was we built an internship database, and we asked students to contribute to it. And we ended up getting a pretty good contribution level, but that was because we had a lot of professors who would really encourage their students to contribute to it. And we also made it possible for people to be anonymous if they felt really uncomfortable about sharing their information. So I think that, for example, if you're within your career, I don't know if you have a unit in CICS, but perhaps when someone comes in and talks about a great experience, the career person says, could you please, you know, take 2 minutes and share that? Or maybe as part of a class, that's something that a professor gives a couple of minutes to at the end of class. I mean, I think that it's helpful to tie it to something. So I think it's hard for people to volunteer information unless they feel passionately. And another thing that you can do is you can tie it to some kind of, especially with seniors, for example, you can tie it to some kind of, not a graduation requirement, but perhaps there's some kind of cohort that they're in, and there's a way to encourage them to ask somebody else to do it. I'm not sure if that's helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. And I saw someone chatted some other recommendations. So thank you, Chad.
Yeah, sure thing. I did want to also reel back to one point that you made about print not being the same as web. I used to work in the print industry, and I can tell you, just even from a design standpoint, the differences are big. But it does introduce the other point of people don't experience just your website or just your brochure. It's one big experience for them. So having a what's it called, an omni-channel content strategy can also really help.
I think that's a really good point. And I guess that's why I had, you know, I showed the Food 52 website. I didn't show their newsletter, but their newsletter is so chatty and inviting. And like, I'm not drawn to their color palette or their, right, or their pared down aesthetic, but I love their writing. And so I go to their website a lot because their writing draws me in. But their website reflects that pared down aesthetic. And I think that were I to go, it's nice that it feels very complimentary. And I think that's a really important thing, that if you're going to have, if you're your brochure to reflect the way that your the tone and approach that your website also offers, and vice versa.
Yeah, it builds credibility. Imagine if you got that newsletter, it's great. It has this great value proposition. Then you get to the website and it's a complete flop. It feels completely different or alien or disorienting.
Right, right. Or it's really not clean and clear, right? It's funny because I went to a Brute website session yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting, all these different ways that people were thinking about their website. But it's really jarring as a reader, and I feel like, or as a viewer, and I feel like, especially with content, it's the content writer's job to help guide people to the information. If you make it too hard, they're just going to leave, right? I mean, at least that's my my perspective. Yeah. And I think that it's not always easy to distill information. But that's really I think the genius of a really good content person. If you distill it properly, then people really can skim and scan and get what they need, even if they don't go deeper into your site.
I have another one if other people don't have questions. I'm wondering if there are best practices in terms of keeping your website up to date. So like, we always want to be pitching the next career fair, but if I put that in 15 different places across my website, I'll forget to change a couple of them, and now you have outdated information, which makes you look bad. So is there a simple way to kind of keep track so that you can take advantage of having it spread throughout, but not have to worry about forgetting that it will become irrelevant at a certain date?
Yeah, well, I am not a developer, so I'm sure that there are other people here who are developers, but I would say that that would be like a Drupal views thing, where you'd have a view. It would be in, so that you, every place where it showed up, you'd know where it was connected to a view, and so that way you wouldn't have like an orphan posting. But there might be other important things to do to help people know about those things, right? So I'm assuming you're also sending out something through a newsletter, right? Or perhaps you're even encouraging faculty members to, you give them a slide so they can put that into their deck when they're giving a class, right? That it's not just on the website, because not everybody checks the website. I mean, that's the other crazy thing, right?
Yeah.
We build these really beautiful, complex, wonderful things, and lots of people don't go, right? Or they don't go during the window that that thing is posted. I mean, or they don't go to that section. But I don't know if somebody else wanted to talk about how do you make sure that these kind of time-sensitive messages show up and then can be edited all as one.
Like a campaign sort of approach where you have a lot of things deployed at the same time, or at least with the same spirit.
Yeah, Brian, were you asking more about positioning it on the website, or were you asking more about a campaign?
I think maybe campaign is the right word. It's honestly like, I know if it's on my homepage, then I'll see it because I come across and be like, oh, wow, yeah, that event just happened, so I need to change it up, right? It's when it gets buried into a bunch of other somewhat related pages where you forget that you hyperlinked it there, or there's an image there. And so then I hesitate to even put it out into too many different places because then I'll lose track of it. So obviously doing something as simple as just a Google Doc and here are all the hyperlinks that I edited, but it just feels a little bit elementary to be having to do it that way. I didn't know if there's more of an automated way or just a better process behind it where you can be tracking it.
Yeah, at least like an editorial calendar is good to plan, and that can be combined with a content audit. So you audit what you have, and then you can also plan what you don't have, put it in the same sheet and kind of schedule those things out. But it also helps you maintain a working inventory of what those things are, assess value over time. For example, if I wrote a blog post 5 years ago, does it still have value? And if not, let's get rid of it. Oftentimes people get this like hoarding attitude with content.
Yeah.
And we need to have a responsibility for what value there is for our audience, which means that we have to have empathy for our audience and understand what their needs. And if you don't know, then I think that that's a good place to start, is just taking that inventory, developing an understanding of what your audience needs are, and going from there.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So would the audit be comprehensive, like every few months, or would you just do it every week, but not the whole thing, just parts of it? Or what's your strategy for that part?
Yeah, that's the question right there. And it really depends on the size of your audience, their expectations, because some audience are chewing away at content and others don't really expect much at all. So it's the traditional "it depends" statement, but you should set up a routine. So do your first inventory, try to assess value of each item, and that's going to be the most laborious approach at the very first, that initial investment. But after that, then you're just keeping it up. It gets a lot easier after time. And assign editors. Understand that you're not doing this by yourself. Have other people help you with this, and get on the same page and develop a team. But that book, Content Strategy for the Web, is like the de facto standard for this stuff. And her podcast is really good too. In fact, Confab was supposed to be the same week as DrupalCon in the same city. I'm sure that's canceled as well, or will be soon. But no, that's Christina Halverson. She does a really amazing job in this industry. So I'd follow her.
Cool, thanks, I will.
Well, it looks like we're at the end of our session, and I just wanted to thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
great.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.